Hello, my name's Vicky Washay. Last week, I couldn't seem to stop myself sneaking some of the content from this week, so it'd be worth going back and listening to last week so that you've got the two together. So this is a little part series of 4 podcasts that are really about, I suppose, the foundations of your property portfolio. So number one, really being aware that you can fail if you don't get a good team behind you. So whether you have bought really well, if you don't have the team, it's going to trip you up. Understanding that you're getting into property so that you can make your money work harder, not that you work harder. And so making sure that you have the systems that allow you to go away on holiday. And last week we talked about when is a crack a bad crack. So really, how can you grasp, if you like, the construction skills that you might need to understand when you're walking into a property what's going wrong. And I'm going to set you a challenge at the end of this particular podcast that will blow your mind if you play along with that game. So, as I said, my name is Vicky Washay and this is A Wealthy Life. And what we're going to do is do What You Don't Know About Property Part 2 today. And this is sort of valuations and surveys, the semantics. And that's what I want to get into right now, because we tend to use these words interchangeably, and really we shouldn't. It's two very different words with two very different meanings. So let me just sort of explain the difference between the two to start off with. A valuation is carried out by a valuer, and what a valuation is doing is assessing the value of this property with a very specific underlying sentence. How much would it be worth for a quick sale? So if I needed to sell this property quickly, how much would I get for it? And if I just explain the difference in that sentence, when you go into an estate agent and you ask them to value your property, what they're doing is, I suppose, two things really. One, making you feel how much your house is worth and that your house is fantastic so that they get you to employ them. But also what they're doing is they're trying to value the property at the maximum price they think they could get it, because they know that if they don't, another estate agent down the road will value it for more, and you may then go to them. So an estate agent valuation is about the maximum price this property could achieve if I'm prepared to wait 2, 3, 4 months, maybe even a year to get that price. And so when you look on Rightmove, you'll often see properties that have been sitting on the market for over a year. And if you then go back and do other searches, you can find out that other properties in that street have sold, but for less. And for whatever reason, either because the seller has requested this, or just because the estate agent has got it wrong, they pitched for the job rather than pitching to actually sell the property, they've not been able to shift it. Now, of course, they're not going to get their money until they sell. So there is a little bit there about estate agents need to be careful about not overpricing too high. But of course, every time there's a little bit of fever in the market, it's so tempting to push the prices. In fact, we talk about house prices going up, and I know I knocked them the other day, but I do believe that quite a lot of house price inflation is caused by estate agents when the market is ripe. So think about, for example, the pandemic. Pretty much the whole world closed down. When we came out of 2020, probably at the end of 2020, even into early 2021, there was so much built up pressure in the housing market. Housing prices started to rocket. And estate agents, as I described them before, can be a bit shark-like, and they smell blood, and then they will edge the price a little, edge the price a little, edge the price a little. As soon as you start to get solds in a street, you can edge the price a little bit more. And as long as there is demand, and we've talked about this before, supply and demand, as long as there is demand and enough supply to feed it, property prices will increase. That's an estate agent valuation. A valuation on a property that comes alongside a loan is where a valuer has effectively been employed by the lender. And now what the lender says is, look, I don't care if I could get 100,000 for this property if I leave it on the market for a year. I am a lender. I am not a property owner. I am not a housing association. I don't want housing assets. I want money in my bank. Either I lend it to you and you pay me back that loan with interest, and then I can lend it out to somebody else. Or if I've secured it against an asset, my loan is secured against a house or potentially a painting or a car or any other form of value. I don't want the asset. I just want my money back. So I know that I can sell this asset as quickly as possible and get back my money. And so when you're talking about a valuation at a quick sale, you're actually looking at something that is potentially slightly below that market value area. So say the value in an area is 100,000, an estate agent might be cheeky and put it on the market for 110, 115, knowing that somebody will put an offer in, but they'll get about 110 to 105. A lender wants to know that if they put it on the market for 95, that it'll be snapped up, and maybe someone will bid a bit more and they'll get 100 or 110. So they're coming at it from the other angle. And so this is about valuations. So when you go for a mortgage, you will pay for a valuation. You have to. And although you pay, some lenders do offer free valuations, but broadly, although you pay, that valuer is employed by the lender, not you. And so you might get a copy of the valuation sent back to you, often from your broker, but it is not your document, and the contract wasn't between the two of you. You'll also see that it is typically a 1 or a 2-page document. It is very brief. Yes, it was a house. Yes, it's got 3 bedrooms. Yes, it has a roof, 4 walls and a front door, that type of thing. And there's a little bit of commentary that then will come at the bottom. And often, and I learned this quite quickly on, it's cut and paste. So there's a standard sort of form that they've got filled in, because this is a whole row of Victorian houses. They're all mid-terrace or whatever, except for the 2 end ones. And they're all going to be suffering the same type of thing. So check that the fireplace is still there and they haven't removed the fireplace. Check for this, check for that, check for this. And there'll almost be pre-typed paragraphs in this document. And I know that that's true, because one of the very first valuations we had talked about subsidence, but it was a mid-terrace Victorian. There wasn't a single crack on a single house in that street. There was no way that there was subsidence. They said that the chimney breast had been removed, but it hadn't. There was a piece of missing carpet. And there was another thing that they said. And it just felt like they'd actually done a survey on a different property. And I think it's where the surveyor, I used the wrong word. See how easy it is. They'd done a valuation on the wrong property, and it felt like that. They hadn't. They'd done the valuation on our property. It was one of the first ones that we bought, but it just didn't feel like the valuer had actually been inside at all, and that there were just these standard sentences, and they just not edited the master document, if you like, correctly. So that's the valuation. Now let's use the word properly. Surveyor. A surveyor is someone who will have different level of construction understanding, different level of qualification. In the UK, they will be RICS, which is the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. That's typically who you would go to. They would understand about how the building was built from the ground up. They'll know whether there are foundations or a floating concrete platform. They'll know whether they're expecting concrete floors or wooden floors on suspended beams. They'll know whether they're looking at lath and plaster walls or plaster walls. They'll know whether to expect asbestos. But then what they'll do is they'll also understand the problems. Now, in a valuation, the valuer might say there are signs of movement because they've seen cracks, or you need a damp inspection report because they've seen damp in the building. Whereas with a survey, they will unpack that for you and explain it in more detail. I mentioned last week about how I employed a surveyor and went along with them to learn, obviously, the very, very tip of their trade, but to get into their minds to understand how they think and learn some tips and tricks from them. And this is what you will get in your surveyor report. There are two levels of surveyor report that you can get. There's the home buyers, which is, let's call it step 1, or they call it level 2. And then there is the full structural. And the difference between these. Now, if you are getting into buying a property and pretty much you've either seen it or you work with someone like me and we know there isn't any work really to be done other than light refurbishment inside, there's nothing structurally wrong with it, a standard lender's valuation is sufficient. You're talking probably £500 and that's fine. Maybe even free if you're lucky. When you get to a surveyor's report, you're talking about a different level of person coming out, and you're talking about them spending more time and the report becoming much more detailed. And so at this point, you're going to pay more money, obviously. I think that it is worth it if you're investing in properties that cost a lot of money or that require a lot of work or that are in an area where there are known problems. So you're aware of the fact that some of the properties in the area have got subsidence, or you're aware that there's, you know, problems with damp or whatever it is. But for your regular buy-to-let property investor, usually a valuation is sufficient. If you then move the whole extra hog and you go to a full structural survey, you're talking about £1,000 or more, £1,500, £2,000, depending on the property. You're talking about them spending a full half day out there. All of the building will be photographed, and so the report will be many pages long because it'll have the written report, but it'll also have all the pictures there. They'll take pictures of the roof and everything. Now, this is great. But actually what you can do if you have visited a problem and you're concerned is just get the valuation, which is your basic option. And you've got to have that anyway, even if you get all the other documents, you've got to have a valuation for the lender, and then bring in the specialist trades as you need them. There will be people out there that can give you a pest report if it looks like you've got woodworm or anything like that. There are damp people out there that can do the inspection with all the meters and lift the carpets and maybe even lift a floorboard and probe corners if you've got damp there. Because then if you do, you're actually getting a much more current and very specialised report. We recently had a full structural for a client and it didn't go well at all. Having spent some £2,000 to survey what was a very large building with 2 flats in it and a basement, pretty much 50% of the stuff that this person said wasn't either relevant, wasn't a cost, wasn't a risk, or wasn't accurate. And so we were in a position where, because what we'd actually got was somebody who was fairly junior, without being rude, they had got their university qualification, but they hadn't got that life experience, not life experience, but that professional experience, that having been in the business for, 10, 20 years, having seen it all, they weren't able to put the practical spin on everything. They were doing everything very much by, so in the textbook, a crack like this, looks like this, is like this, means that. Whereas sometimes what you can get if you get a more experienced surveyor, which is what I experienced when I employed them, is they do a stand back and they go, right, okay, well, yeah, there are some, take, for example, render. There's some cracks in the render, but the bulk of the render looks like it's in good condition. What I would do is scrape it out, fill them, give it a good coat of paint, and this will probably last you, well, it depends on the weather, maybe another 5 to 10 years. Or they can then say to you, yeah, there are some cracks, and actually that plaster is live, so you're then going to be in a position where you need to take all the plaster off, and now you're talking about a 10 grand job. So that nuance, you're paying a lot of money for something, but if you're not getting the nuances, then a valuation and a trip with a trusted builder, or a valuation and the bringing in of the expert teams, either, sometimes, what you can do is And I've done this before. I mean, we did this on one of the properties we were buying. We asked if we could get in a gas safety engineer and an electrical engineer so that they could carry out a service on a boiler in an empty property that we were going to buy, because we were 100% certain that we were going to buy it. But I just wanted the paperwork up front because it could be an opportunity for me to negotiate. So I put my offer in, my offer had been accepted. And then I brought round the gas safety engineer to service the boiler while they were there and do the flush, because if he's coming, he may as well do it. Half of the cost is them showing up to do the gas certificate. I may as well pay the extra bit and get the rest of the work done. And we got the electrical inspection carried out at the same time. I've then got 2 of the documents that I need in order to rent my property already under my belt. But I had the potential of 2 documents that would prove to me why I could then go back and speak to the vendor and just say, right, this has come up. Will you go halves with me on the cost, or will you reduce the price, or whatever? And so sometimes just taking a view on this. You can't take a view on a valuation. If you're going to buy a property with a loan, you are going to need a valuation, and whether the lender will give it to you for free or make you pay for it, that's it. But it's how you see the property and what you do with that, let's call it surface information that you get. What are you worried about? What have you noticed? Who could give you more information on that? And again, if I go all the way back to the first podcast in this series of 4, your team. You know, in the early days when I was working with my letting agent, I would get my letting agent to come and look at the property, because she is so skilled. She has seen so many properties. She's handled so many repairs through her business that when I knew I'd got one that I was going to go for, I'd get her to come and have a look, not only because I wanted her advice, but also because I was going to use her as part of my trusted team to get the builder in to do the work that we were going to do. And whether this was how we used to operate before the pandemic, which is where we would be buying houses on the open market, basically gutting them and then putting the tenant in, or more recently, we tend to buy landlord to landlord. So there's a different experience there. And obviously, over time, my experience as spotting all of these problems has got better and better as well. So think carefully, because if you're spending £2,000 on a full structural that doesn't really give you the information you want in the way that you want it, and doesn't even give you the information that you could go back to the vendor and negotiate a price, then what was the use of spending that extra 1,500? You could have just got your valuation, and you could have got in 2 specific skilled sets of trade people to specifically tell you about, you know, a creature infestation or some damp or some cracks. So think clearly about this. Now, what I have got for you is a super game. So strap in, and I dare you. The auction challenge. Now, depending on where you are, how these are operating, and they could be online, but what you really want to do is pick a local auction, local property auction, obviously, a local property auction. And what you want to do is get to go to a couple of the open days. Now, don't go and view properties that are on the general market that you're just going to buy through an estate agent, because you're going to miss the point of the game. And the point of the game is to spot why the vendor is selling. So I mentioned that I put a couple of properties up for sale. And the reason I did it is because often with the new way that they're doing auctions, it's called a modern auction, that basically it's the buyer that pays the sales fee. Whereas traditionally, if you sell through an estate agent, you, the seller, pay the estate agent fee. So I was going to save £6,000. The buyer was going to pay the £6,000 for each property, and I was going to save that money, and I was going to get it sold quickly. But you will see properties, and there was a strategy back in the day where you would buy a fairly ordinary house, you would distress it, you would even sometimes put the tin grates on the front of the building, put it in an auction, and then when the market's right, this only works when the market's right, then all of a sudden people will go crazy to buy it, and actually you would get more than if you had done up the work yourself. I mean, it was a very, very clever, very niche very specialised strategy that was probably only pulled off successfully by the guy who was teaching it, maybe 2 or 3 other people. But the strategy is that people will put properties in an auction that are a problem. Now, sometimes the problem is with the lease. Sometimes the property is that it might not have a kitchen or a bathroom, because if it doesn't have a working kitchen or bathroom, then it is not something that a lender will lend on. It could be that it is non-traditional construction. If you could find some of those either in your personal area where you live or in the area where you want to invest, that would be brilliant, because you'll learn about them and you'll learn what to avoid. It could be things like there's a sinkhole in the back. I went to view one property that had basically got a buddleia tree in the front room. It had come in the base of the front room. It had worked its way through the cement layer between the bricks. It had grown into the building, and then it had turned round and gone up through a window and out the other side. It was the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen. So it could be that there's work to do. It could be something paperwork. It could be something legal. But if you could find some that have some structural problems and work out why this is being sold and what's the problem, and then if you can go to the actual auction and sit on your hands, do not take your credit cards, just sit there and listen to how people bid on these things. I've then followed that up sometimes when I've been in the mood, and I will go up to a person who has bought a property that I've seen that I thought was interesting and ask them, did you view the property? What purpose are you buying it for? And sometimes people will like to have a chat with you. Sometimes they'll be a bit shy about it. But the number of people who have bought properties that I visited, that I have seen expensive problems, and they've not bought. And I remember very clearly one young couple, and she turned around and she said, oh, well, we wanted to get property A and we were outbid. So we've got the money because it's an inheritance, and we bought property B, and they've not been, and they've not seen what the problem is. And I didn't tell them, and I left it to them, but they've spent a couple £100,000 on a property they've not viewed. So the auction challenge will, I think auction challenge is almost as exciting as a spreadsheet. That's how much I think about the auction challenge. So if you can, and if you want to learn about property for yourself, this is a massive lesson. And as I said to you, in the 4 podcasts that, make up this little patch that I've done, I've offered you an opportunity to get the How to Become a Successful Property Investor course, which includes some of my time and some of my books, which would give you all the baseline information. If you put that together with the property management spreadsheet and the auction challenge, you will go a long way towards bringing your knowledge and your understanding of investing in property up from probably, 1 star to at least 3 or 4 stars. And I wish you all the best. It is a challenging and a rewarding business to be in, an opportunity to make. It's not about a lot of money, because that implies like a lot of money today, but a lot of money over a period of time that can provide you with that financial security that you really need. If you're looking to get support from someone like me rather than getting involved in it yourself, then listening to these podcasts will give you an idea of what I'm doing behind the scenes on your behalf. And when it comes to it, that you can then learn about as and when the time is right for you. I hope, as always, that I have put some whoosh into your life. My name's Vicky Whooshea. This is A Wealthy Life, and we've been talking about all things systems, team, and all of that over the last 4 weeks. Starting next week, you have got a series of, 6 podcasts where I am interviewing some incredible people, really looking at the starts of their journey, how and why they got involved, but then moving on to maybe how the role of property has played a different part in some people's lives. So enjoy your week. Please rate, review, subscribe. Please get in touch. If you'd like a copy of the spreadsheet or you want to know about the course, you'll find the links. I'll put them again at the bottom of this podcast for you. Meanwhile, I wish you a wealthy life. Thank you very much for listening.